Welcome to Catalista's 2 Minutes to Midnight, the Future of Work. My name is Ed Goldberg, coming to you from the studios at Catalista Centrale. 2 Minutes to Midnight connects the dots between capitalism, democracy, and rapidly accelerating technology. We're using a book as a through line for the series, and the book is People Get Ready: The Fight Against a Jobless Economy and a Citizenless Democracy. It's by Robert McChesney and John Nichols. 2M2M, The Future of Work, takes a look at specific fields and topics that impact each of us. In this episode, we'll be looking at the future of work in the global North and South. Peter Frase is an editorial board member of Jacobin magazine, where he's a regular contributor. His book, Four Futures: Life After Capitalism, was published by Verso Press. In the book, Peter argues that technological advancements and environmental threats will inevitably push our society beyond capitalism. Peter, if our economic system remains as it is today, what does the future of white-collar jobs look like?
What we'll probably see is increasing inequality of the sort that we have seen over recent decades, in which a handful of people, possibly very overworked people, may continue to be employed, so that probably not anytime soon going to completely replace the job of a graphic designer with a computer, but it's already the case that computers make that job much less labor intensive than it once was. And those trends will continue. Now, the other thing to consider is that a lot of the time, technology is not deployed by employers purely for the purpose of increasing productivity. And indeed, often it's not for that purpose at all, but rather as a means of surveilling and controlling workers. And in the pandemic period, with a lot of people working from home, you could see this in particular in the way that the employer was reaching into the worker's home, literally installing software on people's computers at home, monitoring how people are using their time. These are all the kinds of uses of technology that aren't really about increasing productivity. They're really increasing the ability of the employers to control and micromanage what their employers are doing. And so without either through collective action at a workplace level or at a government level, without some sort of collective action to fight back against that, if employers continue to have all the power in the situation, then they're going to push to use technology in a way, one, that saves them money and makes them more profits if they can do that, or to simply more tightly control the activities of the people that they do employ. So I would see that as the sort of track that we're currently on.
Rachmi Hertanti is the Executive Director of Indonesia for Global Justice, and she's a member of the International Organizing Committee for Asia-Europe People's Forum since 2016. Rachmi worked for the Jakarta labor community and has 2 law degrees. Her research includes the invasion of foreign banking in Indonesia, food sovereignty, and responsible agricultural investment. Rachmi, in a world where technology is accelerating rapidly and profit comes before people and planet, what does the future hold for women and men who live and work in the global South?
In the developing countries, especially digitalizations, perhaps it could be like new hope for increasing their economic potential, as well as solutions for billions of people and micro, small, and medium enterprises to social interactions is arranging to its new form. But the desire to make the transitions to digitalizations is not accompanied by efforts to protect labor rights and public data, including the democratic governance in our country. So the unpreparedness digital infrastructure makes it dependent on developed countries or technology producers in rich countries. So this shows that developing countries will continue to face dependence and inequality in the issue of digital-based services. So it will once again open up a new monopoly space for corporations. The COVID-19 pandemic actually became a turning point for the industrialization process and global trade in several main aspects. First, from our perspective, the importance of accelerating the use of digital technology in various aspects of life, ranging from the trade, financial sector to manufacturing production system. Second, we also see the strengthening of the spirit of deglobalizations to anticipate bottlenecks in industrial supply chains that are globally interdependent towards supply chains based on intra-region. And third, we also see that the massifications of the use of new technologies has consequences for new materials that have begun to marginalize the role of primary industrial exporting countries. So for us, actually, what will happen to the workers in the global side, especially in our countries, the existence of digital services give birth to vulnerable types of work, where workers, they are working part-time without clear legal protections. And sometimes the platform companies act as an intermediary between services who workers don't have a definite legal protection status to access decent labor standards. And the digital platform companies ignores the workers in it.
Peter, what role should democracy play in the future of work?
It's essential that we really broaden and deepen the conception of what democracy is, because we are raised and sort of socialized so much in this country to think of democracy as just meaning there's some elections that you can vote in every once in a while. And I think a lot of people don't have faith in that. They rightly see that that does not seem to change things, or that the options on offer are not very satisfying. But I mean, I think it's important not to artificially separate the question of democracy from, question of economic justice and economic power. If we want to talk seriously about a democratic society, that means to me just a society in which people have a say over what happens to their own lives and the lives of people of their communities. That doesn't just mean being able to elect your government leaders, although that's important. For most people who are wage workers who work jobs, whether it's in a white collar office or in a blue collar situation, people spend most of their waking hours not being free, not living in a democratic system, in that unless you have a union, you have basically no say on the job. And even if you do, the boss is ultimately the authoritarian ruler of much of your day. And so I think of democracy as meaning that we have really a say over all of our lives, rather than democracy being this sort of narrow thing off to the side that you go and vote in November and then everything goes on as before. I think that's the key, both to making substantive changes that will in fact change the direction of all these technological developments and these economic processes. It's the key to making real change, and it's also the key to giving people some reason to believe that democracy is something essential and is something worth caring about and fighting for, by broadening it in that way, so that you understand that the most fundamental questions of dignity and autonomy and liberty and control over one's life and one's future, that's what democracy is about. And that we've really attenuated that concept in this society down to the point where, again, it just becomes checking a box on a politician. So to me, that's the key direction that this conversation has to go.
Rachmi, what are some of the challenges that technology introduces to workers in Indonesia and the global south?
Most workers right now are working in informal positions without any strong relations, especially in our country. Labor regulations or our labor law that protect their minimum rights, such as minimum wages, social security, and many more, it's not enough yet, because there are many changes in the model of productions, but then the government hasn't responded to these rapid changes into the strong regulations that can protect labor rights in our country. So what happens in our country, where now we are facing a big challenge, especially for the workers, without any strong protections from the state itself. Most of manufacturing industry in our country is actually based on very low model of technology. And we are really dominated by the low skill labor. And now they try to shift the old technology into automation, with supported by the artificial intelligence and other things. This will reduce the numbers of people who work in the manufacturing sector. So I think that's what we are trying to understand about the transition models in industrializations in our country.
Peter, what are your thoughts on the possibility for deep change?
I'm not that old, but I was radicalized in the 90s as a teenager, at a time when the left's fortunes seemed much worse than they do today, even after the failure of Bernie and everything else. I think it was inevitable that for some people that had one of their first big brushes with math organizing, to have it be Bernie and have that be so exciting and then have it be a disappointment, it's understandable. I also think that in some ways there was a shortcut around the work of building a mass democratic movement for change that was bound up in people's investment with, we're almost there. If we just elect Bernie, then things are really going to be different. And so then when that failed, it felt like the whole project had collapsed. But if you look more deeply into what's happening, the kind of organizing, whether it's waves of labor struggle and union organizing, whether it's people building tenant unions in their cities, so much to me, compared to when I was first radicalized in the 90s, so much to me still look so much brighter in a certain sense. Things are more dire in another sense with the rise of the global far right, with the intensifying effects of climate change. In some material senses, things are worse. But in another sense, we've still, I feel, escaped from that cloud of there's no alternative. Not that capitalism was good necessarily, but that there just was no possibility of anything different. And I think enough of that has been broken down that despite the necessary ebb and flow of struggle and the fact that people will have these setbacks and disappointments, I still feel after everything, we're at a better position on these issues for making real progressive change. I think we're in a better position now than we have been most any time in my life.
Rachmi, are there ways that technology can benefit workers in Indonesia and the global south?
What we want right now, actually, how the digital technology itself can be used in a positive way. So not abandon the protections of the workers, including how the state still guarantee that they can still have access to a decent work, for example, or even with the protections of the social insurance, for example. This is what happens if the control and the monopoly of technology is still part of the model of capitalist systems. I think there are many initiatives have existed to respond to these rapid changes of digital technology. And how we can create a collaborations works, not only among the activists, but also how we can collaborate with the scientists, with experts to develop technology that we can use based on the fundamental principles of sharing economic models, not by a monopoly by the corporation. There is a good example where one of digital platform owned by the trade unions and how they use it for their own benefit and interests. I mean, they can create another alternative digital platforms that collectively owned by them and control and manage it based on their own interests. The role of trade unions really strong here, where they have a big memberships, and then how they can also have strong bargaining positions in their struggle. But then now we need to shift the role of trade union not only as a tools for the struggle of their rights, but how now we use the trade unions itself to consolidate the power of the peoples to create a new model of economic justice. Because mostly the trade unions itself, they create a collective economic model that organized by them, managed by them, and to fulfill what the members want as their interests. We believe that the new alternative can start if the trade unions can more think strategically how to change the world. So not only to think in the passive.
And a similar question for you, Peter. How might technology serve workers?
The technologies that we have available to us now give us the possibility of living in a world in which we all don't have to work as much to satisfy our basic needs and can have an ecologically sustainable high level of social development. That's simply a matter of whether we're living in a society that's prioritizing the well-being of all people and the maximization of free time for all people, which is not the society that we, of course, live in. Rather, we live in one that prioritizes the maximization of profits for the small number of people that own most of the wealth. Finding a way politically and economically to challenge that concentrated power is the key then to creating a situation in which new developments in technology can make it so we can all be working 4-day weeks rather than one in which some people are losing their jobs, other people are being overworked, and inequality continues to intensify. There are a number of components. On the side of workers, obviously strengthening the protections of workers to do things like form unions, to collectively organize, because one of the fundamental power imbalance that we're facing here is that workers are isolated and separated and have few rights to organize, or at least few rights that are enforced to organize. whereas employers are powerful and concentrated and have tremendous influence over government. So making it easier for people to organize is an important part of it. But also, there are other ways in which you can diminish the dependence that people have on their employers, which is one of the things that gives employers so much power. So even something like universal health care, a demand like in the United States, Medicare for all, is taking something that people either get from their employers or don't if they're working for someone that doesn't provide health care, and makes it something that just exists outside of that employment relationship. That gives workers a certain amount of stability, a certain amount of power. The same is true for things like generous unemployment insurance or a universal basic income, as some have now proposed. All of those are the kinds of things that can happen. There is also the matter of expropriating wealth, to use the old-fashioned terminology, meaning taxes on wealth, but also serious government intervention to break up or regulate or take over some of the private oligopolies and monopolies. For example, the fact that the power generation and distribution system into the public realm, doing something to break up the big tech giants, Google, Apple, Facebook. I think without some serious action along those lines to really seriously destabilize these major power imbalances that lead to this widening inequality and that lead to technology always being deployed in a way that serves shareholders first and people second, if at all. And I think it has to come from the people, from masses in motion. It's not going to be a handful of politicians or philanthropists or ideas people who are going to change things from on high. However, there do need to be, things coming from the level of the state, from the government, to do things to make it easier to organize, to give people some of those material supports, to open spaces where people are able to organize, are able to then take the steps both within their workplaces and politically in terms of the electoral realm, giving people the space, the resources, the time even to engage in that sort of process. That has to happen in part through things that are coming down from the top. But I think that part of what makes any really people-centered reform scary to the ruling class is that any kind of reform that's really worth its salt doesn't end there. It changes people's minds about what's possible and leads them to expect more. And materially, if it's something that increases people's economic security, that gives people also the material ability to contest for power and contest for more. So I think it is a sort of a back and forth between what people from the bottom up are able to organize for and fight for and win, and then how those victories are then consolidated at the level of institutions and organizations and government policies, and how then that feeds back into creating more of that space for a genuinely democratic culture in which people feel like they are able to actually have a say and change how society is running.
Are there any other thoughts that come to mind about workers in Indonesia, Rachmi?
What can we produce? What we can sell together? What we can do together? There is a lot of ideas here that we can promote actually with this collective economy. We call it koperasi in our country, cooperative. So we can develop many things from this model of cooperative. And I think we start from small things right now. But we believe that one day we can approach to the next level how the cooperative itself, the cooperative model can build the model of new economic collective actions on economic models. We call it economic democracy. We have that in our constitution. We have that in our work, how the democracy model when we are trying to decide something, to make any decisions, to create any kind of model of systems that we think in the cooperative, when the people actually own this cooperative, they can give some inputs, they can freely pick what we want together to develop a strong economic justice model for the future, because the cooperatives itself actually based on the fundamental principles on economic democracy.
Any final thoughts, Peter?
I think co-ops are a great thing, though they're not a sort of overall model in my mind, in that a cooperative business, in the sense, if we're just talking about basically the difference between having democracy within the workplace to the extent that you are participating in the governance of your workplace rather than just having a boss who is arbitrarily above you. There's a lot of value in that, I think, for a number of reasons. One, just to show that it works and is possible, that bosses are not in fact necessary, that you can have a productive democratic workplace. That's a sort of a prefigurative aspect to it. Just to show that such things are possible is important. I do think that no matter how good of a cooperative workplace you're in, if you're still competing in a capitalist marketplace, there's limits to what you can achieve. Ultimately, the market will discipline you. I mean, even when Yugoslavian socialism, which was predicated on this idea of worker self-management, ran into this problem, which is essentially you can end up in a situation where you're your own boss collectively, but you still have to exploit yourself essentially in order to survive in the marketplace. So I don't see it as the magic solution or anything, but I do think it's very important that people are thinking about these models, experimenting with these models. It's opening up the possibility space of what really can be done. What are the other ways that we might run an economy and a workplace? And what does it mean to really permeate democracy into every aspect of our lives? One of the things that in a way makes me hopeful is that with the younger generations of people coming in, you've seen so many of the promises of this era of capitalism have been really shown to be hollow. You could take, for example, I'm 41. When I went to college, it was still an era when everyone would tell you, you take out debt to go to college and it'll be fine. You'll get a good job and pay it back. Don't worry about it. And now I think people recognize what a fraud that was. And I think the same is true of the idea that a white collar job is going to be either a source of security or a source of personal fulfillment, and that you can go and find a job you love and that will make up for whatever's wrong with the system. I think that's also increasingly something that people find wanting, people find hollow. So even if we've not yet reached the sort of critical mass of being able to really turn the system in a different direction, I do think there's a lot more critical awareness, particularly among younger people, about the real nature of the system that they live under. And I think, as with any kind of social change, there will have to be a process of the young leading and the old kind of eventually coming aboard once it becomes clear that systemic change is necessary and on some level inevitable. It's just a question of what kind of change it's going to be.
Thank you for joining us for 2 Minutes to Midnight, the future of work. And thanks to our guests, Peter Frase and Rachmi Hertanti. You can find Catalista on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, where your comments and likes are always appreciated. 2 Minutes to Midnight, the future of work, was edited by Joshua Cash, Christina Hiramoto, and Chris Porro. The mix is by Chris Porro. Our music is composed by John Askew. The executive producers are Chicky Munch and Binny Bunny Munch, with assistance from Ed Goldberg and Gerald Gerbil. This is Ed Goldberg signing off from the studios at Catalista Centrale. See you next time.